Um, well, welcome. Thanks for being here in week 9. And we are almost done to the end. So I thought today that I would, and I think I've spoken with each of you about your final papers, but I just wanted to open up again, and this isn't the last time that I would be asking this, but again, asking what questions might be coming up for you in the final paper, anything that needs clarity. Yeah, just any questions that you may have. One question I did have was about page limit word limit, and can people go over word limit? And one of the things that I have said back is like, here's Paul. Let's wait till he gets here. Hi, Paul, welcome.
Thank you, sorry I'm late.
No worries, good to see you. You're right on time. So I was just gonna open up the floor, Zoom room, to see if you all had questions about final papers, anything that I could help you with, anything clarity-wise, or if you needed to. Obviously, I've met with many of you to just talk through individually what you're doing. So happy to talk more about that. One of the questions was about word limit. The prompt says 2,500 to 3,000 words, which is a fairly short paper. Actually, it's not incredibly long. And so I am not going to be a stickler if you go over. If you go under, I will be a stickler. So you must at least have 2,500 words. But I would venture to guess that most people, given the amount of material that we've had in this course and what people want to write on, that you're going to go over. Just have mercy on me, because I will be the one reading all of these papers. So, 3,500 words, if you could kind of cut it off around there, that'd be great. Don't go over 4,000, please. I'm interested in your content. And so if you feel like I really want to write on this, this is important to me, don't cut it short. But again, who was it was it Pascal? Have you ever heard this quote by Pascal? He says, I would have written you a shorter letter, but I didn't have the time. And so there's a way in which actually it takes more thought and more intention to write something that's concise and short. So do that as best as you can, and don't cut it short, so that you fit within, fit under 3,000, and have mercy on me, who will be reading these papers. So any questions about that, or anything else that's been coming up as you guys have been thinking about final paper?
I kind of already sent you my first draft, and I'm waiting for your feedback. So that
yes, I know.
Yeah.
It is on my docket of things to do, Ping. Thank you for sending it to me. It looks good. I do have some comments.
Thank you.
I just haven't been able to get to, I think tonight I'll be able to do that. So
okay,
yes,
thank you.
It's coming.
Need to work on it. Yeah.
You bet. Yeah. I am welcome. I'm willing to look at anybody's outline if you'd like to send it to me, and just I might have some suggestions. One of the things that I said in my intro video to this week, but I wanted to emphasize again, is I've been loading some resources into week 10, the Canvas page, week 10, based on some of the questions that I've heard and some of the topics that I'm hearing that students are wanting to write on. Laura just gave me some great resources, because this is what she's wanting to study with her PhD on addiction and recovery and abuse, trauma, those sorts of things. So I just loaded some of those things. And I know there's at least one or maybe two of you on the call for whom that would be interesting. And some other pieces there. So I re-uploaded some of my summaries that might be helpful for people. And I uploaded on when to refer, because I think that's just a good thing to circle back around to now that we are mostly through the course. One of my worries is that students may leave this course and say, okay, if it has to do with trauma, I just can't touch it. I just need to refer immediately. And so I think one of the things I was trying to say is, yes, that's an important step to learn how to discern when you're to refer out. And as we've been learning last week and this week, empathy, the ability to listen to the emotion that's underneath one's experience and be able to respond to that. We can all do that. And we can all actually build skills to do that. And there's lots of resources out there that talk about building empathy. It's not just you have it as a gift or you don't. It is something that can be built over time. So I'm rambling a lot there, but that was a lot of information. So any other questions? Yeah, James.
Yeah, I had actually a question on that because on when to refer. Because the more and more I talk to my colleagues or friends in ministry, it's almost it's either down the line 50-50 or maybe 60-40 or something like that,
Yeah.
where a lot of pastors, I guess traditionally they are on that line of ministering when others will say, oh, you should refer. And so like a lot of pastors, they take on that, like, I can help this person fully, even though they don't have that like that background, like on like a on suicide, let's say, or let's say if it's more severe psychological issues, they'll take on that that burden to minister to that person. So I was always wondering, like, is there like a legal aspect to this as well? Like, is there like a line where maybe even in the past where cases were prosecuted against pastors or something like that, where they said there was a neglect of not referring when they're supposed to, or I'm not sure, like if there's, I haven't read any references to that aspect.
Yeah, great question. Laura, I'm curious, you were nodding a lot, and I know that you've had some experience in a church. I'm wondering if you have thoughts first to that. Do you have any responses?
Well, I was just thinking it's a really good question.
Yeah.
I feel like it's not widespread as far as legal actions being taken. So it's not something that's causing people to pause and say, I have to refer because of legal issues. But I don't want to say that it hasn't happened. I think if a pastor is not willing to refer and feels like they can take on something that they're not skilled at, I think that might say a lot more about the pastor than about the issue at hand. Sometimes people like to control or take hold of their sheep and not let anyone else in, and not really see it as a communal effort. So I think it's changing that mindset of seeing the community aspect of it. And these are all the people that we can work together to help people versus these are my sheep and my people, and I don't want anyone else to come in and say something different.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And I think like there's a whole like psychological kind of aspect to it where, and faith, where they collide in this area where the families, let's say of someone who needs help or should have been referred, they are they're giving to, I guess they're giving authority to the pastor in faith, and allowing, I guess, better judgment or health, judgment of health to be overridden by the authority of what of the church. And so I think that's but yeah, like I said, I guess to reiterate, I've never heard of a family so far saying after the fact, probably in most cases saying like you should have helped or you should have reached out to somebody.
Now I'll answer that question, and thanks Laura for also kind of bringing in the sort of ethical piece of what it means to be a pastor and what it means to be able to give away some of your authority, if you will. And I think it's not giving away, but it's conferring authority on someone else who has a higher level of training. And so the work of the pastors, in my opinion, and I think this is widespread, is to get those referrals ahead of time, to know who you would refer to, so that if someone came to you who is in crisis, a teen is in crisis, a family has just been in, you know, something has happened, that there is not a scramble, there's just an understanding. And if you saw the interview I did with Inez and Bobby, like they just have a handful of people that with whom they know they trust, they know they're trusted, they'll either go and confer with them, talk to them about it and get help, like what should I do? So sometimes it's even checking in with a mental health authority or person who has mental health training before you like send the person there. But sometimes it is actually that. So that's one piece that I think is important. Second piece is actually, it's probably more of a technical thing, but some pastors, based on their denomination, are mandated reporters. So, and it actually does depend some on denomination. And I know this because I supervise our 3 chaplains at Fuller. And we were trying to figure out if they're mandated reporters or not. So mandated reporter means if someone is a threat or harm, is saying that they're a threat or harm to themselves or to others, that you're mandated, you must report this to authorities, you must go outside of the confidentiality space in order to get that person or others help. Like that's kind of, and so some pastors, based on the denomination, they are mandated reporters. What I found out with the chaplains is that it depends on your denomination, because in the ways that, this is where I'm a little, I don't know the words as well, the bylaws or however it's written up, pastors must follow that. And I would assume not just pastors, but staff, church staff would need to all follow, if they're working with kids, if they're working with teens, if they're working with adults, that they would have to follow those laws. So I would say it could be that if a church has these mandated reporting laws and a pastor decides not to, and then something terrible happens, he or she could, get into legal trouble. I haven't heard of that too much, but I'm, not to put too fine a point on it, but I can tell that, like, even as we're listening to the news right now about, Southern Baptist Convention, a lot of the reasons that they, if I'm understanding it correctly, that a lot of the secrets were just because of the fear of litigation, the fear of getting dinged by lawyers. And so, I mean, it's a real thing. It's a real thing. And it does take, I really like what Laura said, and I'd love to hear what others would say too about this, but that it is kind of it's a communal way to think about this. And if a pastor, he or she tries to be a lone ranger, it's just a bad idea. It's not gonna go well if the pastor knows that he or she is over their head and tries to take it all on themselves. So others, what do you guys think as we're talking about this issue?
I also did want to add on the flip side. So let's say, for instance, James, someone comes to you and they don't want to be referred out because they trust you. They don't trust the other person. They don't know who this other person is. Why are you sending me in that direction? I think it's called a soft handoff, where the pastor, again, this relationship should have been established before a crisis came up. So the pastor knows this person, but it could be a situation where the pastor sits in, it may be the first 1 or 2 meetings together, and then stop showing up afterwards, but just so the person now has more of a trust built, and it's not just go to that person because I can't handle this situation.
Right. Yeah, and that's, you just get the consent of the person to say, yes, I'm fine with my pastor sitting in with me.
Right.
And if that person gives the consent, then and if the therapist is willing to work with that, which he or she should be, then that's great. Yeah, it's called.
Yeah, I think they mentioned that in their interview as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that they would say, if you want me to, I could. If you approve, then I will sit in.
Yeah.
So they talked about the soft handoff. So you're right on, Laura. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it can be tempting to for a pastor who is being sought out by a congregant for help, and that congregant won't see anyone else but that pastor. It can be really tempting. We, in other courses, we can read about the narcissistic pastors and the ways that therapists, pastors, all of us are tempted to become the be all end all for people. And in in doing it because we think it's the faithful thing to do, because this person needs us. And there have been times, even as a therapist, that I've had to say, I think we're done. Like, I don't think that I'm the best person for you any longer. Now, this was after many years and lots of things that happened, but that needs to be something that a pastor thinks about. Is if I feel like I'm the be all end all for this person, maybe there's something that I should pay attention to that's happening in this system that's making me all powerful. Other thoughts? It's a great conversation. Yeah. Okay. Oh,
I have a
Paul.
question.
Yeah, of course.
Related, unrelated.
Sure.
What are going forward some other courses that would be good as follow-ons to this one?
Mhm. That's where I'm going to point to our academic advisor, because I don't know.
It depends. It depends on what you want to study. So if you're interested in the pastoral care, chaplaincy, recovery ministry, those type of areas or fields, then usually anything that starts with the CN in the class schedule, so like a CN5 something, will be a recovery ministry or counseling type of class. Yeah, those they try to offer often, like introduction to pastoral counseling. This summer there's a 12 steps class. So yeah, it really depends. Sometimes SOP MFT have classes that are available to all students. They're not offered often, but especially in the fall and the winter. So in the fall, there's usually FS 500 Family System Dynamics, and that one is a powerful class with Cameron Lee, and that one's open to all students, no prerequisites required. And then he also teaches a church as family systems class, and that one's usually in the winter and open to all students as well. So,
those online, Laura?
They're both, yeah. Well, the last couple of years they've been online because of the pandemic. So I don't know if you'll keep it online, but I hope so, because it's been a good hit with other students.
I think you guys probably would recall that Cameron Lee was the one who hooked me into getting into family studies. So he's a dynamic teacher, really thoughtful.
Yeah, the family systems class blew my mind. The stuff that you never hear ever think about.
But yet, what's happening in my family? Like that's right. It was kind of for me unlocking. Like, wait a minute. Oh, this is interesting. The only other thing I can think of, Paul, is in terms of some of the work that we've done in this course is reflecting on vocation. And we've had these formation groups as a part of it. I don't know if you've taken SF 506 or IS 500 before. It's
500.
IS 500. Okay, so then you wouldn't need to take that's the only other course right now that I'm working in where we have formation groups that are reflecting on vocation and how it fits with the material. Yeah, good question. So I want to dive into this question about sleep. Can we? I'm really curious. You know, what I was saying as I was looking through the posts is that, you know, some people, it was like, yes, this is typical, this is fine, I have a good pattern of this. And other students were saying, like, this is really hard for me. Like, this is not something that comes to me easy. It doesn't seem possible. It doesn't seem feasible. And it doesn't seem realistic. And so Laura and I were just kind of kicking around this conversation even yesterday, just thinking like, what is realistic? And one of the things I'm hoping this does is really push us to think about our theology of rest and sleep. And it can't be systematically the same for every person as we think about rest, because of our lifestyles, because of our stages of life, because of our vocations even. One of the things that one of our students last quarter said is he's a firefighter, so he can't have a strict sleep schedule. In fact, I don't want him to have a strict sleep schedule for our good, right? and yet he's also a seminary student. He's also he's a father. He, you know, all of these pieces. And so I guess I'm curious, like, how do we think about a theology of rest and Sabbath that seems to actually make sense and can work? Is it impossible? Do you just have to decide, okay, I'm going to drop a class because that's the only way this is going to happen? Yeah, thoughts. That's about that.
Well, I didn't say it in my post, but I mean, I've been doing those things since I was an undergraduate and it saved me. Okay. That, and in the same course, they taught us study habits. You know, I mean, after I took that course, life was so good. I mean, I was almost ready to drop out of school before I took that psychology course. It was really just great. But I think we have to be practical. Yeah, there are lifestyles, you know, if you're married and have children, you can throw all that stuff out in terms of following it strictly because, you know, the lifestyle kills you. I mean, the babies little kids, they don't have, you know, they have a schedule, but it's their schedule and that becomes our schedule. But I do think, you know, even like when I travel, you can still have a routine of some sort. You know, you do not study in your bed. I mean, or if you do, it's like the last 5 minutes and it's the preparation for going to sleep. It's not that you're really studying, it's telling your body it's time to go to sleep. And so that's what I think you have to do, is just adapt it as best you can. And I will also say, I didn't put in my post, I almost did, I should have. Yeah, I follow that stuff religiously and I put my head down and go to sleep. Am I currently getting 7 to 8 hours of sleep a night? Not even close. And what can I say? You know, we're all trying to do, you know, we're trying to get to a certain point in our life and you kind of got to do what you do. It's like raising kids. You got to do what you got to do. So, you know, even though you follow this stuff, I don't think it guarantees you're going to get enough sleep. I mean, if it's long term, you're not getting enough sleep, that's a different thing. You know, it's anxiety or whatever. But yeah, I just try and adapt, you know, as best you can.
One of the things I was thinking about, and thanks for that, Paul, I think adaptation is key. And yes, there are seasons. Like I think of my friends who have newborns, right? Like you're just gonna be off, you know, or young kids. It's just, you know, it can almost seem like, how can I look at someone's life and say like, you should get, you know, when I don't have children and they do. So I mean, there is those pieces, but and I think there are ways to think like, where are the places that I can carve out space to spend time with God? Like, where are the spaces that, and where are the spaces that I can do some kind of Sabbath that actually takes care of my body? Because sometimes my Sabbath does not even take into account my body at all. It becomes, oh, good, it's Sabbath. I need to wash my clothes. I need to go grocery shopping. I need to, you know, and it becomes really just different kind of work. And so being that intentional to say, unless I stop and change some of my habits and patterns, this will just continue in the same way. And I think my hope is that students don't burn out in seminary, and that students create patterns in seminary that will help them post-seminary to whatever vocations that God invites them into, that they've already established some kind of understanding. So for me, okay, I may grocery shop still on whatever, but I know that there are particular things that I just need to do to reset. And like swimming outdoors, it sounds maybe odd, but that is my thing. Like when I do that, it's a great reset for me. And usually a nap follows, and then I'm just like, oh, this is okay. I'm energized again. But you know, yeah, I'm curious that, James, you were just saying, I'm just not even sure this can happen. And I just want to, that's real. Like that is a real thing, given, you know, all the demands on your life. But what do you do with it? Like, what do you do with thinking through Sabbath and rest?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, this was the only week that I said in my discussions that I did not or was not able to complete as a practice at all. So I was just upfront with my group. I said I didn't complete this at all, or I wasn't able to. I think listening to both you and Paul, you guys kind of hit on the key words that I've been using. So like, intentional, um, seasons, and well, for me, I think we're all in different seasons in life, right? So I think these moments, I kind of put it in this way where uh, at this moment in my life, I feel that this is what I have to sacrifice. So it's kind of like my perspective of my season. And I wrote this in my discussion, like I know that it's even detrimental to my health that I don't get enough sleep, because that's part of the reading that we had. Like it's better for your health, and but all this, it's kind of like a willingness to do in order to get to where I want to be or accomplish in my life. And I said that sleep, out of all things, seems to be the most easiest thing at the moment to give up, to sacrifice in order to get to where I want to be. And because when I look at my life, what am I willing to sacrifice and time-wise? Some people will choose family, some people will choose work and do less or better in those things. But for me, I don't want to sacrifice those things, especially family. So when I want with my family, I want to give my best to my family or to my ministry. So I choose sleep. I'm in my classroom here today. I almost did not come, to be honest. I was like, the 5 minutes before I logged on, I was like, maybe I just watched the video, later on. Do I need to be in the class live? Because I came the first week, and now I'm coming on the 9th week. So, but all those other, I just watched the video. But I just said, well, I need to do my part and come back into the meeting and participate. So I want to sacrifice in that way. So that's why I want to be intentional in those things, and I choose those things the best I can.
Yeah, makes sense. Bye, Paul. Thank you.
Yeah, James, I think you're absolutely right about something has to give. I think it was last year, I saw someone post something that like was a triangle. And as students, it said you can only choose 2: good grades, social life, or sleep. So pick 2. And I realized for me, being in the middle of a pandemic, I chose good grades and sleep because I didn't have a social life. I was like, well, can't really go anywhere, everywhere's shut down, I'm isolated. But I can't give up my sleep for me personally because I feel it in my body. And I realized that in order to show up well, I turn into a child if I haven't had sleep. Like, I'm grouchy, grumpy. I start saying stuff that doesn't make any sense. People's like, what's wrong with you? I'm like, I haven't slept. So I feel it in my body. But you're right. And I feel like we're in a world that there's just so much to get done that it's easier to give up on sleep than to give up on all the things we have to get done. And I remember hearing someone say like, oh, you get to a point where you have to fire yourself and just say, I can't do this anymore, whatever that thing is that we're holding on to, or try to outsource it to someone else and just ask for help for someone else to do it for us, or pay someone else to do something for us, just so we can fire ourselves and get sleep. But as you were speaking, I was thinking about even as working in ministry and being bivocational, and how a lot of pastors and a lot of ministry leaders have to be bivocational just to keep up with the cost of living. And when I was volunteering at our church as our women's ministry leader, I'm in church almost half a whole day of Sunday, like 8 a.m. to probably noon. If we have lunch after, I'm there till 2. And everyone who was staff gets Monday off. But I didn't get Monday off because I had to actually go to my job. So there was really no Sabbath. I had half the day Sunday evening if I didn't want to be around people. But by the time you do chores and get all that stuff done on Saturday, and you're working Monday through Friday, and then you're part of your church volunteering and doing all that on Sunday, there is no time to sleep. And if you have kids and they're in social activities, there is no time to rest. And I feel like that's, again, going back to the community aspect of it, it takes a community to say, okay, we're all gonna change this structure so that everyone can take a break and everyone can rest. Or, hey, let's rotate weekends. Let's take your kids this weekend so that you guys rest. You take our kids this weekend so we rest. But I think the next generation and the ones after are gonna go back to more of a communal mindset and less of individualistic, just so we can finally just start thriving better and not being so exhausted.
Makes me think, Laura, when you said that about the communal support, I don't know if you guys have, I visited Israel and I was, there during Shabbat, and there is such a communal understanding about resting for a day in Judaism. The stores shut down. You've got to get your food before, because everything closes. And I had never experienced anything like that before, watching everyone go to the market together at the same time to gather the food for Shabbat, and watching storefront after storefront close, and then actually spending that time, with my friends doing this ritualistic Shabbat. It just dawned on me, oh, this is how one could do Sabbath. This is how it happens, because there is a communal understanding that this is a commandment from God. And we are all going to, like, our social systems, our church systems, our grocery stores, we're all following it. That's something I can get behind. But I think you're right. We are not set up well to do this. I think for many people, I would say, and I would say like Western evangelical Christianity, I'll just kind of put it into our world. I don't think we're set up well for that. Everything seems to be pushing against it. And it is a challenge. It is a challenge when it's not done communally.
Yeah, I think in Europe, it's similar. Everything, a lot of things, especially if you're in smaller towns, but I'm in Paris, so things shut down around 8 o'clock.
Yeah.
And then on the weekends, it's Sundays, a lot of stores are closed, so it's not probably as aggressive as in Israel, but I kind of feel that, because it's definitely different when I go back to visit US. You have Walmart 24/7. You go doing that. Everything opens early and ends late, or it's open 24/7. So it's a different kind of feel, and I think it's helpful to be to me to stop and rest. But the one thing that you hit on about community as well, both of you, is it's also about like knowing when to say no to certain things, right? So I hear this a lot, saying no when you're in ministry, or if you want to refer, you need to know when to say no, right? But then at the same time, if you look at like school, like Fuller, for example, just to give you an example, I was just taking one class, but in order to get my scholarship, I have to take 2 classes minimum. So when I was taking one class, I was like, oh, this is great. I can do this. But now I have these rules that the community or the environment expects, or so I could say expectation and rules and regulations kind of forces us into certain areas as well that we have to oblige to. So then to get my scholarship, I have to take 2 classes, and the burden of rest is pushed back even more. So, and then or even at work, and this applies to work, other family as well, learning to say no is an art form. And even in that, you have to kind of gauge how to go about it.
I agree with you 100%. Not even an argument for me. That's something that in advising we've been pushing and saying a lot of students are not able to rest, even though we're teaching rest in classes, because we're requiring 2 to 3 classes minimum. I remember when I was excited that I got a scholarship, and to get that scholarship, I had to take 3 classes, and I was still working full time. I've never tasted burnout before till that season, and it was scary. When I say, I mean, like, I became cynical. I didn't want to pray anymore. I was frustrated and didn't want to be around people and didn't want to go to church. And I'm like, all this to get a scholarship in seminary? So yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
with you.
and I, just to be honest with you all, it's like I'm actually giving up scholarship for the
A
next
lot of people do.
2 because I'm not going to take, I can't handle the load. So
Yeah.
I'm not taking I'm letting go of their scholarship. So that's where I am at this point. Yeah.
And that's, yeah, that's a sacrifice, right? You're talking about sacrifices and what sacrifices, and that's a big piece of it. You know, I'm bridging this conversation to also thinking about systems, right? And systems, you could say, oh, it's about the individual, but actually, I think what you're pointing out is it could be Fuller's system that is pushing students. And don't get me in trouble and send this video to somebody that maybe come back at me, but I do wonder. And Laura and I were talking about this, that, you know, I was a student who left everything from my ministry in Texas, moved my whole life here. I knew one person in California. I started over and I took my courses like full. So I could do 3 courses at a time. You know, I could do an MFT and work in a practicum and have a life. And I think that the system is still based on that model more than we'd like to admit. I think that we are trying, the system is trying to shift towards more of an online space, but I think the systems have still been built for, i.e. the syllabus template that says these are how many pages the students needs to read, or this is the number of hours we expect that a student should spend. And it's a live conversation right now among faculty, and I think among administrators as well. Ultimately, I think it's a faculty decision. But I think the system, it has not caught up. And so, you know, as we know, the system will continue. The system is created for the outcome that it wants. And so it's going to continue to get, no matter people in it saying, this isn't fair, or this is too much, or the advisors jumping up and down, like, we're killing our students. Unless the system shifts in some significant ways, we're going to continue to get the same outcome. And that's kind of systems theory together. And so I agree. I don't, you know, and I think there's a tension in, this is academia, we need to be rigorous, which is true. And not all of our students are wanting to do academically rigorous courses that are leading to a PhD. You know, there's overachievers that do that. There's people who do want to do that. And there's others who are saying, I want a great education, but I'm currently involved in ministry and I don't want to burn out. And I think it's a live question, and I do not think that we've solved it at Fuller. I don't think that and some people may not even think it's an issue, but there's others like Laura who works with students all the time who can probably sees it every day, and it's an issue. Yeah.
And I would say it's also the dynamics of different systems working together. Because even like James pointed out with working, it's the reason that students no longer can just do only ministry while doing classes and having to work. It's because of the larger system of, oh, the cost of living is going up. I can't let go of my job anymore like I used to be able to, because I can't pay for anything. I will go dead broke. So that system is even bigger than Fuller, because that has nothing really to do with Fuller. But it's like, if systems don't adjust to each other, people just crash and burn. And it's, yeah, hopefully change will come soon. Hopefully.
Systems that are meant for good can bend towards hurting people. I am curious, and I wonder if we can kind of move into that space, thinking about systems. Both of you, well, all 3 of you, work in organizations. And so you clearly have organizational issues that come up, systems pieces that come up. I'm just curious, as you've thought through Friedman's book and some of the things that Dr. Lee has said, has anything new come to you in terms of thinking about, oh, these are systems dynamics that I'm working with? And maybe I'm seeing it in a new way or a different way. Does anything like talking about triangulation, talking about conflicts, talking about identified patients, those kinds of things that that we've been reading about?
So my organization, we have like a lot of longtime employees. And so there is, you know, to put it positively, there is a good like family-like dynamic here. And then I think just, this is kind of generalizing, but in general, people in recovery are typically more open about their stuff than, you know, maybe the general population. And so, and we also work in like a very, what can be a challenging environment. And so there is, you know, a nice family dynamic here. There's a lot of support, but I also recognize some of the things that that Friedman's book talked about in terms of, you know, some of it can be a little bit dysfunctional. Some of it can be that triangulation happens. That process, I'm maybe not going to be able to name it well, but one of the videos talked about a congregation that had kind of squeezed out their leader, or their leader had left, and then they were gonna, you know, elevate one of the kind of brothers into the leadership role, and something like quite like that just recently happened in an organization. So it was interesting to be involved in that discussion. And I even talked it over with the woman who's become the program director here, and you know, she didn't go into details with me as a subordinate, but she talked about, oh yeah, I've already survived the sabotage. You know, I know exactly what he's talking about there. So, and you know, the fact that she's even in the position that she's in may have been the result of sabotage for the person who had that position last, who, you know, was here just a couple of years before she moved on. So yes, a lot of those system dynamics, you know, in both a good and a bad way are at play here. So it caused me to look at things in a new way, which is helpful.
Yeah. Thanks, Colin. Yeah, there's a way in which systems love equilibrium. They just want to stay stable, right? So, they don't want to have change, because change means loss. And so people will fight tooth and nail to keep the equilibrium. If you think like the air conditioner, the air of the room, just to keep it kind of at a constant, steady state. And if somebody tries to upset that, sabotage will come, because the person does not want that to happen, or the system doesn't like that happening and needs to get back to the steady state. And as we know, sometimes systems need to change because they are, again, bent against humanity, and perhaps towards sin, or towards hurting people, or towards many of the isms that we've been talking about in this course. And so systems do need to be changed, and people within systems are resistant to it. So yeah, it's a good call. Any other thoughts about systemic change or dynamics in systems?
I guess for me, yeah, in my organization, our policy, our logo, or not, our motto is was it a better policy for better lives. and so we use that motto, and we try to use that motto to initiate good in all aspects of life, from government to health to finances to just develop in general for, you know, countries. And so within that, one thing that I thought about just leadership wise, and this, you know, kind of, I try to connect this to my ministry as well in my church, is not all people are built to lead or are called to lead. Even with, you know, people are given positions of leadership, but they're not necessarily have that skill set to be a leader. And for example, like managers are hired to lead in my workplace, and you just know right away they're not managership material. they were probably good, like for example, good statistician, probably like, let's say they're the best statistician in the world, and that's why they're there. But to keep them there, they say, okay, now you can lead. We'll give you 15, 20 people, but as a, they're not great leader. They're more of a team member, but because of their position and the skill sets that they want to keep in the organization, you're elevated. And I see that in all aspects of church community as well. In my other class, I'm taking a practical theology class, and we're doing case studies. It's similar to I don't know if you know Dr. Ra. We're doing case studies, and we're talking a lot about like one case study where there, people, some guy just comes into the church 10 weeks straight, and everyone's looking at him like, oh, what leadership role can we put this guy in? And everybody's just trying to jump on him. And later on, you find out in the case study, oh, this guy has a lot of legal problems. He's aggressive towards women, et cetera, et cetera. And I think we have to change this idea of what leadership is. And then, in church, we always say like, yeah, of course, you may fool me, but you won't fool God, right? So we have all these backup sayings in church. But I think we need to take, in the church, we need to take more practical stance, looking at people, not for what they can give to us, but first to see what we can give to them first, and then see at a longer rate through life what God wants to do with each person, etc. Yeah.
Oh, it's a great example, James. Thanks for talking about that. We see that so much, right? Like it's actually called, in leadership terms, it's called the Peter Principle, which is someone keeps getting graduated up and up and up and up and up, and they eventually get higher than their skill set. Actually, they're getting into a job in which they're not qualified, but they just continue to go up. And you have to wonder, like, what is it about the system that keeps doing this? Is it that we just assume there's a ladder and that everybody just keeps moving up the ladder? Is that how the system is working? What happens at Fuller often is that you have a fantastic faculty member. They're a great professor. This has happened many times. I've watched. They're great at their job of teaching. And so what happens? They get put into an administrative role as well. They start to run some kind of center. They run something at Fuller, and they crash and burn. And then we look at them and say, oh, they're just not a good administrator. And it drives me nuts, because it's what you're saying, James, that there is some kind of understanding that if this person is great, they must be great at everything. And so let's give them way too much work and actually take them out of the very thing that they are best at. Now, that's not all faculty. There are some really great faculty who also do administration. I could name 5 right now that are amazing. And there's many who are not. And I think you just have to ask the systemic question, like, what is it about the system that continues to push people into places that aren't actually part of their gift set? What is it about the system that keeps graduating people, having them go up the ladder, where they shoot up farther than their skills are actually allowing them to work? It's baffling to me. And in a system, it just keeps happening unless it gets interrupted somehow and someone says, have you noticed that this keeps happening? If you don't notice, then again, the system is designed to get the output that it was created for. And so you'll continue to get these poor faculty who are trying, but it's really not their skill set. There are actually people who go to school for administration, turns out, and get PhDs in them. So, I think I hear you, and you have to ask the systemic question. And I think you're also asking, like, why do we use people in that way? The person you said who comes in and people are like, oh, how are we going to use this person to plug them into our system? It's Boishe. Yeah, it's an interesting question. Hi, Boyshay, welcome.
Sorry. Yeah. Thank you.
How are you?
Hello. How are you?
So where are you calling from?
I'm at the hospital.
Okay. Super
How are
interesting.
you?
How's
Yeah.
we are doing well. We're talking about systems, Boyshay, and I'm curious. So we've just been talking about like what are dynamics of the organizations that we work for, and like what, as we've been reading about Friedman and some of the things we've been talking about with systems, and maybe you can't say because you're actually in your organization right now,
Yes.
but we're just catching you up. We're just kind of talking about how systems can hurt people, you know, and
Yes.
go
Yes.
against the very thing that they're designed to not get the output that we would hope for when it comes to flourishing.
Right.
So,
Hmm.
but since you jumped in here at the end, what's that?
Oh, sorry. I
sorry.
think Colin was going to share.
Oh yeah, Colin, please go ahead.
No, I just was gonna say that I really like the contrast that I think it was Todd Bolsinger in one of those videos, talked about the difference between leadership and stewardship. And I think a lot of people are good at sort of, keeping the system, stewarding it, keeping the system functioning the way the system has always functioned. And that's a very different skill set than someone who is bringing about some sort of transformation. And I think that, a lot of times stewards get elevated in the position of leader, and it's not the same thing. The organization may want that because it wants to stay static, but it's not, helping people change. It's not transformative.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting. Because for me, I kind of saw it differently, where I consider stewardship part of leadership. I don't separate or divide it. So I was a little bit lost there, but I think to be a good leader, you have to be a good steward. And yeah, I'll leave it at that.
If you're interested, so adaptive leadership, adaptive change is a whole system of thinking. And Dr. Bolsinger has written 2 or 3 books. The first one is called Canoeing the Mountains, and I highly recommend it. It's a really great book. It's been wildly popular, IVP. And I'm wondering if what Todd often talks about, and I know this because he used to be my supervisor, is the difference between a manager and a leader, both of whom are important, but a manager is sort of continuing to maintain a system, and that's important. You need people who are maintaining systems. But he would define, and I think some of the authors who he refers to in his book would also define leadership in a different way. Leadership is bringing change, would be how he defines it, and how other authors in Adaptive World. And so I think steward gets a little confusing because we're all stewards in a sense, like we all care, right? Even leaders, I as a leader, I steward the lives of the people with whom I'm given, entrusted to. However, I do think that there's ways that there's some people called to maintain systems and some people that are called by God to step in and perhaps change systems that need to be changed. And I think that goes for pastors and their roles in churches. I think it goes for, administrators. Many different people can bring about change. And again, that brings all of the systems pieces back in, as we've been talking about, that people don't like change because that means there's loss involved. It's not that they resist the change, they resist the loss that's underneath it. And so to get to that place, leaders have to get to the place of saying, okay, there's competing values here underneath the surface. And that's why people are not willing to let go of the things that they love, because they both want to see faculty members rise and do really great things. And we see that it's really killing the faculty to do this. So there's often these competing things that are going on underneath. And so a leader needs to get to that. A manager would just say, let me just make this as good as possible. Like, let's just keep kind of rolling with this system. But I think Bolsinger would say a leader comes in and says, we're going to have to change the ways that this is happening because the world is changing and we can't keep doing the things that we've been doing because the world out there, that's why it's called canoeing the mountains, because they get to this place where it's a longer story, but basically you get to this place where the canoe doesn't work anymore. And so you have to change your plan in order to continue to move forward. It's a bit of, I think, how Bolsinger would define it.
Yeah, can I just add something?
Of course, please.
Yeah, so I thought about that and I was like thinking that was really good. I thought like just when you're talking, I thought of like change like involves all to look at their role, from leadership to role players, you know. And the dynamic here is that there are some leaders or some people who are willing to give up their leadership to raise up new ones or new leadership at their own expense. And then it's just how they're built. And then the other people who are built are leaders are, okay, I have to look, something's changing. I have to look at, oh, where's my role now if in this change? And so it's more of a defensive. And then they say, okay, if we all have to change, I have to protect my lot. And so they either change or they push down or move away, right? So you have that two types, a tier of people at that moment of crisis. They say, I'm gonna sacrifice and lift up others, and hopefully I rise up too, or I see my lot and I push down and make it hard for others to rise up. So but in general, I think change involves everyone to look at their position. Yeah.
Boishe, you were nodding your head. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I do agree that a leader can exist within a system if the leader is willing to put the team ahead of their own self-interest. And I think that's what James is alerting to, that if we fall together. And it's not just the interest, because most oftentimes the manager is just maintaining the system at the expense of the players, because this is what the structure says must happen, and not looking at the heartbeat of those workers. It's always lower level workers who suffer in systems, right? And the manager is just there to pretty much put them in line and keep them according to what is written. The system forgetting that it's still people who are operating within that system. But a leader comes and is able to reconcile both the system and the people who are the engine that makes the whole thing move around without offending the boss, the upper management. So you have to literally maintain the people and also the other people that the manager have to answer to. So how do you reconcile those two entities? Because those are two competing entities drawing the attention of the leader to reconcile. But the leader knows how to reconcile that change without disturbing too much of the system, but at the same time, giving the team exactly what is needed to keep their heartbeat, the momentum continually going. Because at the end, the manager knows that when the bottom goes out, the whole system does crumble. How do you reconcile those two things, competing things? Because those are two competing things. How do you reconcile those two competing, very important items, but still maintain is where I think the leader shines. If it's a natural born leader, because there is such thing as those who are naturally born leader, but there are those who are learned leader in how to reconcile systems.
Yeah. Thank you, Boishe. It makes me think, if you want to read a dissertation, my dissertation was actually on what are the attitudes and behaviors that help change leaders to make change in graduate theological education. And one of the traits, well, I would say one of the attitudes, because I do think, as you're saying, Poche, you can develop these things, is humility. And what I noticed is that a number of leaders, they, once the change happens, like once they go through the change, the hard and the great thing is that no one remembers that that person brought about the change, because the leader has made it so much about the followers, about the people who are working. Everybody became part of the change. They were all working towards it, such that everybody kind of thought at the end of the day it was their idea. And what I noticed time after time is these leaders who spent much of their lives, happy to send you my dissertation. I'm always a little embarrassed about it. Making these changes, like really sacrificing a lot of, back to sacrificing a lot of their political chips, if you will, to make this change happen. And then they sort of just fade away, like fade to the background, and other people take over. And like for me, watching that, it was a really pretty amazing thing to watch. And many of them would go on, because this is just the way that they are built, or go on to make more change in other places. So it's not like they're done. But there is this, like, I remember one woman who was doing prison ministry, and she was a faculty member, and she was like, you know, if you can bring people on board and have them bring their ideas and get them to own it, you can move mountains, because you're involving the people in the work, is what adaptive change is often talking about. So, and truly, I'm happy to send my dissertation or read Canoeing the Mountains by Todd Bolsinger. I'm sure you can find it in the library online. It's quite good. And then his second book, I think, is called Tempered Resilience. And it was kind of funny, because I was writing my dissertation, he was writing this book. We were both sort of writing the same kinds of things, because Tempered Resilience is about what are the characteristics of leaders that help bring change. And so at one point, my advisor said, you cannot share your manuscript with Todd, nor can you read his manuscript in his book, because we don't want people thinking, because we're like sharing a mind, no, we didn't steal mine, but we kept talking about it. We were both excited about it. So I ended up doing that, and he ended up, what was neat is that our results, like the particular attitudes and behaviors that we chose, that I discovered in my grounded theory research and that he wrote about, were fairly similar. So it was gratifying to me. But yeah, my advisor was like, nope, can't read it. Don't let him read yours. I don't want any cross-contamination. So
that's really interesting, because amongst the like in missions, right? So we church planted a team, churches here, and then we're part of a team of other missionaries who planted churches here in France. And they're all Americans and a couple of British. But the thing is really interesting is every one of us were like saying, our heart is that for the French. And so we're here until we find a French leader who will be raised up to be a French pastor and then take over the church. And I think that's all of our hearts, right? But out of the 20, I've been here in France about 18 years now. So when you look at all this group dynamics now, I would say half of the churches have actually done that. And so you have that, are they willing to give up the role as the senior pastor, the missionary pastor, to have a real church led by a French raised up leader? And that's the dynamic which you are sharing.
And I know it doesn't exactly relate, but as Amy and James, as you guys were sharing that, the idea of the leader during the transformation and then stepping back for the next leader, I just keep thinking about how Jesus stepped back for the Holy Spirit to come forward. And we're not really taught that in life. We're taught to just hold on to, we're in a leadership position, hold on for dear life. And it causes a lot of problems in churches when it starts to become the next generation coming up. A lot of times churches aren't building up the next generation because that senior pastor wants to hold on for dear life. And then the church just falls apart. And oh my gosh, where did all the young people go? I wonder.
No, I just wanted to also say, piggyback on that, because that's what John the Baptist, literally his head was taken off. And he said, I must move out the way. So the one who really, the other leader that's supposed to continue the team must take his place. But we glance over all of those, all of those things, because maybe our head needs to be taken off and nobody wants their head taken off.
Yeah, that's really true. I love that. And Colin, you also put that, sorry, in the chat. And isn't it interesting, and maybe we can kind of close with this, if you think about some of the systemic issues that have happened in Mars Hill, I'll just choose that. I know that's one that we kind of keep coming back to, but it's such an interesting example. You have to think, okay, there was this egocentric, very unkind leader who was not called out on his stuff. And what kind of systemic issues were happening there that created this person who had all this power, who treated people this way, who had no accountability? Again, you could call it the identified patient. And yes, there were some serious things wrong there. And you just have to wonder, like, the system didn't want him to be a John the Baptist. The system did not want him to step away and give away his power. And therefore, they're all indicted in this. Indicted, that's not the word I want. They're all, caught up in this, what happened and how it happened. So again, listen to that podcast if you haven't. But it's systems can create these superpower people, and they're not trained, they're not desired to, they're not encouraged to step away and to give away.
But isn't that patriarchy? Isn't that patriarchy does that? That's the idea of patriarchy. Is just
Well,
kind of we don't want to talk about
boy,
that.
Shay, why don't you just open a little?
Yeah,
door
we're
there?
trying to get out of here at some point, right?
I love it. You guys are so great. This was such a wonderful discussion. Thank you for joining. James, go get some sleep, and really appreciate you all. Take care. Feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions, okay?
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks
you.
very
God
much.
bless you guys.
Have
Bye.
a good night. Bye.